Why is your life getting more expensive? The answer is hidden in the secret story of the US dollar, a story of how it became a global weapon that now quietly controls your world. To understand the invisible forces shaping your future and your wallet, make sure you subscribe and click that notification bell. Today, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever held a coin or a banknote in your hand and wondered, where did this come from? How did this little piece of metal or paper become so important? Today, we are going to explore the real powerful story of money. This is not a work of fiction. This is the true story of how we as human beings went from trading goats for grain to using gold paper, and now the powerful dollar that shapes our world. We will go through this history step by step using simple, clear English so that everyone can understand and follow along. It's also a wonderful way to practice your English listening skills. So please get comfortable and let's enjoy this amazing journey together. Let's travel back in time. Not just 100 years, but thousands and thousands of years ago. In this early time, there was no money. There were no coins, no paper notes, no banks, and definitely no credit cards. So how did people get the things they needed? How did they buy or sell? The simple answer is, they didn't. Instead, they exchanged things directly with each other. This system had a special name, the barter system. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine a farmer, let's call him Kyle. Kyle works hard in his fields and has many bags of rice. He has more rice than his family can eat. But what he really wants is some fresh milk for his children. Now in the same village lives a woman named Elara. Elara owns a healthy cow that gives fresh milk every single day. She has plenty of milk, but she needs rice for her family's evening meal. So Kyle goes to Elara. He might say, "Hello, Elara. I see you have wonderful milk. I will give you 5 kilos of my best rice if you give me 2 liters of your milk." Elara thinks about it. She needs rice and Kyle needs milk. It's a good trade for both of them. She smiles, agrees, and they shake hands. The deal is done. This is bartering. Trading goods for other goods or services for other services with no money changing hands. In the beginning, when life was very simple and villages were small, this system worked just fine. But as societies started to grow, people began to face some very big problems. The first problem was something called the double coincidence of wants. That's a very big phrase, but the idea is actually quite simple. It means that for a trade to happen, both people must want what the other person has at exactly the same time. Let's go back to our farmer Kyle. Imagine Kyle has apples this time, not rice, and he wants to trade them for a new pair of shoes from the village shoemaker. But what if the shoemaker doesn't like apples? What if his family already has a big apple tree in their garden? Kyle really needs the shoes, but the shoemaker doesn't want his apples, so no trade can happen. Kyle is left with no shoes, and the shoemaker has not sold his pair. This was a very common problem. The second problem was that there was no standard of value. Think about it. How many bananas are equal to 1 chicken? How much milk is worth 1 shirt? Every person had a different idea. One person might think 10 bananas for a chicken is fair. Another might demand 20. This led to a lot of confusion. Long arguments and sometimes even fights. There was no fixed, easy way to know the price of something. The third big problem was saving for the future. It was very difficult to save wealth. If you were a farmer and had a very good year, you might have 50 extra kilograms of wheat. How do you save that for your future? The wheat can rot. Rain can spoil it. Rats or insects can eat it. You can't easily carry it with you if you want to move. Wealth that is tied up in physical goods is not very secure. As human societies grew even larger with big cities, kings, temples, and armies, the barter system became almost impossible. People needed a better way, a smarter system. And so humans did what they do best. They started to think. They realized they needed something new, something that everyone in the society would accept as having value, something that was easy to carry, that wouldn't rot, and that could be used anytime, anywhere. This was the moment the idea of money was born. Before the invention of coins, people started using certain items that were widely accepted and valued by everyone. These are sometimes called commodity money. In some parts of Africa and China, for example, people used beautiful little cowry shells. Imagine holding a handful of these small, smooth shells. They were light, easy to carry, and couldn't be found just anywhere, which made them rare and valuable. In other parts of the world, like in ancient Rome and other places in Europe, people actually used salt as a form of money. Yes, real edible salt. Salt was incredibly valuable because it was used to preserve food. In India, people used things like wheat grains and aromatic spices. Later, they began to use pieces of silver. So why were these things chosen? It was because they were generally rare. They were easy enough to carry. And most importantly, the community had a shared agreement that these things were valuable. But slowly, people discovered something even better than shells and salt. They found metals. Deep inside the earth, humans discovered gold, silver, and copper. These materials felt almost magical. They were very strong and did not rot like food. They had a beautiful shine, and people have always been attracted to shiny things. You could melt them down and shape them into tools, ornaments, or jewelry. But the most important quality was that you could divide them into smaller pieces and weigh them very accurately. This discovery led to a huge change in human history. The very first coins were made around 600 BC in a kingdom called Lydia, which is in the country we now know as Turkey. The king of Lydia, a man named Alyattes, had a clever idea. He started making small, flat, round pieces of a natural metal called electrum, which was a mix of gold and silver. But he did something else that was revolutionary. He put a stamp on each coin, a royal mark like a lion's head. This stamp was a promise. It showed that the coin was real, that it had a fixed weight and value, and that it came from a trusted source, the king himself. And just like that, the world began to change forever. People loved coins. They were so much easier to use than bartering. They were small enough to carry in a pouch. They were easy to count. It was hard to make fake ones, and everyone trusted the stamp of the king or the government that made them. Soon, the idea spread like wildfire. Great civilizations in India, China, Greece, and Rome all began to make their own coins. In India, beautiful coins were made from silver and copper with marks of different kings and kingdoms. In the powerful Roman Empire, soldiers were paid their wages in coins. In fact, our modern word, salary, comes from the Latin word, salarium, which was the money Roman soldiers received to buy salt. As these great empires grew, their money traveled with them. Coins journeyed along famous trade routes, like the Silk Road. Merchants from India might carry silver coins all the way to China to buy silk. Arab traders brought gold coins with them to Africa. For the first time, coins became a kind of global money. This system of using metal coins was a huge success, and it lasted for many, many centuries. But even coins were not perfect. They had their own problems. First, you needed to find the metal to make them. Gold and silver have always been rare and expensive. Sometimes dishonest kings or rulers would cheat. They would mix in cheaper metals with the gold and silver to make more coins and become richer. This would lower the value of the money, and people would lose trust. Another big problem was for merchants and traders who were moving large amounts of goods. Imagine you are a merchant in the ancient world, and you need to carry a large bag of gold or silver coins to another city. That bag would be very heavy and difficult to transport. And even more seriously, it was risky. Robbers knew that merchants carried heavy bags of coins, and a long journey could be very dangerous. It was also slow to count thousands of coins for a big transaction. The world was getting bigger and faster, and people once again started to look for a better, safer, and lighter idea. To find that idea, let's travel now to China during the time of the Tang Dynasty, around the 7th century. China was a huge and prosperous empire. Its people were trading massive amounts of tea silk, beautiful porcelain, and spices. The economy was growing very, very fast. To solve the problem of carrying heavy coins, Chinese merchants and local governments tried something new and brilliant. They created promissory notes. Imagine a tea merchant named Wei. He has just sold all his tea in the capital city. He is paid with 1,000 heavy metal coins. It's too dangerous and difficult for him to carry all that money back to his village. So he goes to a trusted government office. He leaves his coins there for safekeeping. In return, the official gives him a special piece of paper. Written on the paper is a promise. This note is worth 1,000 coins. You can exchange this paper for your coins at any time from the official treasury. This simple piece of paper was the beginning of paper money. By the time of the Song dynasty, around the 11th century, the Chinese government made this system official. They began printing the world's first government-issued paper money called jiaozi. It was incredibly light, easy to carry, and much safer than a heavy bag of coins. But this new idea created a new question in people's minds. How can I trust this piece of paper? It's not gold or silver. It's just paper. The government was smart. They did 3 things to build trust. First, they backed the paper notes with real metal. They promised the people, "You can come to our treasury at any time and exchange this paper note for the real amount of silver or gold it represents." Second, they used very special seals and complex stamps on the notes to make them very difficult to copy. And third, they created very strict laws against counterfeiting. Faking money was a very serious crime, and the punishment was severe. This system worked beautifully. Trade in China became much faster and easier, and the empire grew even richer. But this incredible invention took a very long time to reach the rest of the world. Many years later, in the 1200s, a young explorer from Venice, Italy, named Marco Polo traveled to China. He lived there for many years and saw many amazing things. One of the things that shocked him the most was that people were using paper money for everything in their daily lives. When he finally returned to Europe, he told his family and friends incredible stories about his travels. He tried to explain, in China, they don't always use gold and silver. They use paper instead of coins. You can imagine his friends looking at him completely confused. They probably laughed. Paper. How can a piece of paper be worth anything? They simply didn't believe him. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Imagine you were one of Marco Polo's friends living in Italy in the 13th century. You have only ever known gold and silver coins as money. Would you have believed his story? Would you have been able to trust a simple piece of paper as being valuable? Or would you have thought he was telling a crazy tale? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. It's a fascinating thing to think about. Slowly, very slowly, the idea began to take hold in Europe. By the 1600s, a new system began to develop, starting with goldsmiths in London. Goldsmiths were people who worked with gold, and they had strong, safe vaults to protect it. People who owned a lot of gold started to deposit it with a local goldsmith for safekeeping. In return, the goldsmith would give them a paper receipt, a note that said, "You have 10 gold coins stored with me." Soon people realized something very clever. Instead of going back to the goldsmith taking out the heavy gold coins to buy something, and then the seller taking the coins back to the goldsmith for safekeeping again, they could just use the paper receipt itself as money. If a receipt said it was worth 10 gold coins, it could be traded for goods worth 10 gold coins. That piece of paper became a representation of the gold. Later, the first modern banks copied this exact system. This is how modern banknotes were born. By the 1800s, countries all over the world started to officially use paper money printed by their governments. But again, people had that same old question. How do I know this piece of paper truly has value? To solve this, governments used a system called the gold standard. The idea was simple. Think of it like a ticket you get at a coat check in a theater. Your paper money is the ticket. The gold stored safely in the government's vault is your coat. You can always use your ticket to get your valuable coat back. The gold standard meant that every paper note printed by the government was backed by a specific fixed amount of real gold. If you had a $100 bill, you could in theory go to the bank and demand the exact amount of gold that it was worth. In the United States, for a long time, $1 was backed by about 1.5 grams of gold. This system built enormous trust in paper money. It also made trading between countries much easier because currencies like the British pound, the French franc, and the US dollar were all tied to a real physical thing: gold. But then a terrible storm came that would shake the entire world. That storm was World War I. During the war, which lasted from 1914 to 1918, countries needed to spend a huge amount of money on weapons soldiers and supplies. To pay for the war, they started printing more and more money. But they didn't have enough gold in their vaults to back all these new notes. As a result, the gold standard system completely broke down. After the war, a new problem arose: inflation. The value of money fell dramatically. In some places in Europe, the price of a loaf of bread might cost 100 times more than it did just a few months earlier. People's savings became worthless. There was chaos, and people lost trust in paper money. After the war, countries tried to go back to the gold standard, but the system was weak. Then it failed again during the Great Depression of the 1930s. And then an even bigger, more destructive war began: World War II, from 1939 to 1945. The world saw even more destruction and economic ruin. But at the end of this terrible conflict, one country emerged stronger than ever before: the United States of America. There were a few key reasons for this. The United States had enormous reserves of gold stored safely in places like Fort Knox. The war had not been fought on American land, so its factories and cities were not destroyed. And during the war, the U.S. had produced a huge amount of goods, weapons, and supplies for its allies. So after World War II, most of the world was in crisis, but the United States was in a position of incredible power. And this was the moment that the US dollar began its journey to become the king of all currencies. In the year 1944, while the war was still happening, leaders and representatives from 44 allied countries gathered in a small town in America called Bretton Woods. They came together to ask a very big question: how do we rebuild the global economy and prevent the chaos that happened after the First War? The answer they came up with was to create a completely new system. And they decided to put the US dollar at the very center of that system. Why the dollar? Because at that time, the United States had the largest gold reserves in the world. Its economy was by far the strongest and most stable. So all the countries agreed on a new set of rules. The US dollar would be officially backed by gold at a fixed rate of $35 for 1 ounce of gold. Then all the other countries would fix the value of their own currencies to the US dollar. This meant that if a country had French francs or British pounds, they could convert their currency into dollars, and then if they wanted, they could convert those dollars into real gold from the United States. This was called the Bretton Woods System. It effectively made the US dollar the world's main reserve currency. Countries all over the world started holding large amounts of US dollars in their central banks as a form of savings. World trade began to happen mostly in dollars. Important commodities like oil, gold, and wheat were all priced in US dollars. The dollar had officially become the king. But the story doesn't end there. In the 1960s and early 1970s, the US government began spending very large amounts of money, especially on the Vietnam War and on new social programs at home. To pay for all of this, they printed more and more dollars. But their gold reserves were not increasing at the same rate. Other countries noticed this. They saw that there were many more dollars in the world than there was gold in the US vaults to back them up. So countries like France and Germany started to get nervous, and they began asking to exchange their dollars for gold, as was their right under the Bretton Woods Agreement. The US couldn't keep up with the demand. And then, one Sunday evening in 1971, the American president at the time, Richard Nixon, appeared on television. He made an announcement that shocked the entire world. He announced that the United States would no longer convert US dollars into gold. This event is now famously known as the Nixon shock. In one moment, the dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was now backed only by one thing: trust. Trust in the power and stability of the US government and its economy. This decision ended the Bretton Woods system and moved the entire world into a new era of money, the one we live in today. This is the era of fiat money. The word fiat is from Latin, and it means by order or by decree. Money now has value simply because the government says it does not, because it is linked to a physical commodity like gold. This decision created the modern financial world, a world where money is based on belief alone. And it also gave the US dollar a new, almost unbelievable power. A power that can be used for good, but also, as we will see, as a weapon. We are going to explore this powerful and sometimes surprising side of the story right after this. So if you want to understand the world you live in today, make sure you click that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what comes next. Even after the dollar was disconnected from gold, it stayed on top as the world's most important currency. Why? There are several big reasons. First, there is still immense trust in the US economy. The United States has strong institutions, a predictable rule of law, and a long history of innovation. Second, most of world trade was already happening in dollars. Oil, technology, food, and other major goods are still priced in US dollars. This is a very powerful habit that is hard to change. Third, many countries and large investors buy US government debt called treasury bonds because they are considered one of the safest investments in the world. And finally, the US has significant military power and global influence, which adds to the stability and trust in its currency. Even though other currencies like the euro from Europe, the yen from Japan, or the yuan from China are very strong. None of them have managed to gain the same level of global trust that the dollar has. But just as the world got used to this new system, another great change was beginning. Technology was starting to grow faster than ever before. In the past, people had used shells, then coins, then paper. But in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the world moved into a brand new era, the era of digital banking. Think about your own life. When was the last time you paid for something with a big handful of coins? Today, for many of us, money is just numbers on a screen. You open a banking app on your phone and you can send money to someone on the other side of the world without ever touching a physical coin or a paper note. Let's say you live in Germany and you want to send 100 euros to your friend in Canada. You use an app like Wise or PayPal. In just a few seconds, the numbers move through the digital system, and the money arrives in your friend's Canadian bank account already converted into Canadian dollars. Then came debit and credit cards, which we use in shops, restaurants, and online stores all over the world. And now we have mobile wallets like Apple Pay or Google Pay, where we can just tap our phone to make a payment. Money has become data moving, silently and instantly through the servers of banks and technology companies. This has made life very convenient, but it has also given governments and banks a huge amount of control over our money. And while all of this was happening, something completely revolutionary was born. In 2008, the world was hit by a major global financial crisis. People everywhere lost trust in the big banks. Some of the largest banks in the world collapsed. Ordinary people saw their savings frozen or lost. Governments, especially the US, printed billions and billions of dollars to save these large companies. This made many people feel angry and powerless. In the middle of this crisis, a mysterious person or group using the name Satoshi Nakamoto released a paper online. This paper proposed a solution, a new kind of money called Bitcoin. What is Bitcoin? It is a completely digital currency, but with some very important differences. It has no central authority. There is no bank, no government, no company that controls it. It also has a limited supply. Only 21 million Bitcoins will ever be created, so no one can just decide to print more. It is completely decentralized, which means it is run by a network of computers all over the world. It's like a form of digital gold. You can own it, you can send it to anyone, and in theory, no single person or government can control it. The creation of Bitcoin also gave the world a new technology called the blockchain. A blockchain is like a public record book where all transactions are recorded for everyone to see, making it very difficult to cheat the system. After Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies were created like Ethereum, which introduced the idea of smart contracts, and thousands of others. For many people, this felt like the future of finance, a system with no inflation, no government printing, and complete freedom for the individual. But governments around the world saw a problem. They couldn't control crypto. It could be used for illegal activities. People could avoid paying taxes. So many countries have tried to ban or restrict cryptocurrencies. But the idea of financial freedom was already out in the world. Now let's look at something powerful, and for some, a little scary. The United States doesn't just use the dollar for trade. It can also use the dollar as a weapon. Here's how it works. There is a global messaging system called SWIFT, which almost all banks in the world use to send money internationally. Because the dollar is the world's main currency, the US has significant influence over this system. If the US government decides to punish a country, it can pressure SWIFT to remove that country from the network. When a country is cut off from SWIFT, it becomes incredibly difficult for it to send or receive US dollars. That country is financially isolated from the rest of the world. Let's look at a real example. For many years, the US was concerned about Iran's nuclear program. So it imposed sanctions. Iran was largely removed from SWIFT. Its banks were cut off from the global system. It couldn't easily sell its oil, which is priced in dollars. As a result, its economy suffered terribly. Another example happened in 2022. After Russia invaded Ukraine, the US and its allies removed major Russian banks from SWIFT. The value of Russia's currency, the ruble, crashed. Western companies left the country. Russia was forced to find new ways to trade using other currencies like the Chinese yuan. This use of the financial system as a tool of foreign policy is sometimes called dollar weaponization. It shows that if a country makes the US government angry, its money can be frozen, its trade can be blocked, and its people can be punished, all without a single bullet being fired. This reality has made many other countries very worried. They started asking themselves, why should we be so dependent on the dollar? And this has led to a new global trend, de-dollarization. De-dollarization is the process of countries actively trying to reduce their dependence on the US dollar. Let's look at some real examples that are happening right now. China and Russia have started trading with each other using their own currencies, the Chinese yuan and the Russian ruble. They are using the dollar less and less for their trade in oil, gas, and weapons. The BRICS nations, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are working together to create new financial systems. They are even discussing the idea of a new shared currency for international trade. Their goal is to reduce the power of the dollar. In 2023, they invited more countries to join their group, including Iran, Egypt, and the UAE. For nearly 50 years, Saudi Arabia sold its oil exclusively in US dollars. This was a cornerstone of the dollar's power, often called the Petrodollar system. But now Saudi Arabia is starting to accept other currencies like the Chinese yuan for its oil sales. India is also promoting the use of its own currency, the rupee, for trade with countries like Russia and the UAE. At the same time, many governments around the world are working on creating their own digital currencies, called central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. These could one day be used for international payments, reducing the need for the dollar. Even with all of this happening, the dollar is still by far the most powerful currency in the world. Why? The first reason is trust. Many people and investors around the world still believe the US will protect the value of their money. The second is that US government bonds are still seen as the safest place to invest money. And the third is simply habit. Most global contracts, loans, and trade are still done in dollars. And finally, there isn't a clear alternative yet. The Chinese yuan is tightly controlled by its government. The euro has faced its own political challenges. And cryptocurrencies are still very volatile and unstable. So right now, we are living in a time of a quiet but very intense financial war. It's a war fought not with guns, but with currencies. On one side, you have the US and its allies who control the current system of the dollar, SWIFT, the World Bank, and the IMF. On the other side, you have the BRICS nations and other countries who are trying to build a new system. And in the middle, you have the believers in cryptocurrency who are fighting for a completely different future, one without banks or governments in control. Nobody knows for sure what will happen next. But one thing is very clear. The future of money is changing, and it's changing very fast. Now let's ask a deeper question. How does all of this affect you? How does the story of money affect the life of a student in Kenya, a shop owner in Brazil, a nurse in Germany, or a factory worker in Bangladesh? Because here is the truth. The value of the US dollar can quietly influence what you eat, what you wear, how much you pay for fuel, and even whether people in your community have jobs. Let's break it down very clearly. When the US dollar becomes stronger in value compared to other currencies, it might sound like a good thing. But it's not a good thing for everyone. A stronger dollar means that other currencies like the Mexican peso, the Nigerian naira, or the Indian rupee become weaker in comparison. This means that for people in those countries, it becomes more expensive to buy goods that are imported from other places. Imagine you live in a country that needs to import fuel medicine or food. Most of these things are traded globally in US dollars. If your local currency becomes weaker, the price you pay for that fuel suddenly goes up. The cost of essential food becomes higher. The new phone or laptop you wanted to buy becomes more expensive. You feel this change directly in your daily life. You might ask, why don't our governments just print more of our own money? But if they do that without the economy growing, it causes inflation, which makes the value of your savings fall even more. So when the dollar gets stronger, many people around the world suffer silently. And often, they don't even realize that this global financial system is the reason why their cost of living is going up. When you understand this, you see the world in a new way. It's a powerful piece of knowledge. If you feel this explanation has been helpful, perhaps consider sharing this video with a friend or family member who might also find it useful to understand these hidden connections. Another powerful force is the interest rate in the US. Most people don't think about this, but it controls the global economy. Let me explain it in simple words. When people or businesses borrow money, they have to pay back a little extra. This extra payment is called interest. The percentage they pay is the interest rate. The central bank of the US, called the Federal Reserve or the Fed, can change this interest rate. When the Fed increases interest rates, it has a huge effect on the entire world. When interest rates go up in the US, investors from all over the globe pull their money out of other countries like Egypt, Pakistan, or Argentina, and they put it into US banks and US bonds. Why? Because they can get a higher, safer return on their money in the US. When this happens, money flies out of other countries' economies. Their local currencies get even weaker. It becomes more expensive for their governments to repay old loans, which are often in dollars. These countries can face debt crises. Prices for everyday goods go up, and people lose their jobs. So a single decision made in an office in Washington, D.C., can shake the economy of a country on the other side of the world. Now let's talk about debt. Many developing countries borrow money from institutions like the World Bank or the IMF to build roads, schools, and hospitals. Most of this debt is in US dollars, and this creates a hidden trap. Imagine a country borrows $1 billion at a time when $1 is equal to 10 units of its local currency. But 2 years later, because the dollar has gotten stronger, $1 is now equal to 20 units of its local currency. Suddenly, that country has to pay back twice as much in its own currency to cover the same dollar debt. This is called the dollar debt trap. It's why you often see news about countries like Sri Lanka or Ghana being unable to pay their debts. It's not always because of corruption or bad management. Often, it's because the value of the dollar rose and their debt became impossible to handle. The price of oil, gold, and food all move with the dollar as well. Oil is traded in dollars, so if your currency weakens, you pay more for petrol. This makes transportation more expensive, which increases the price of everything else. Gold is often seen as a safe investment when the dollar is weak. But in cultures where gold is important for weddings and traditions, families suffer when the price goes too high. Basic foods like wheat and rice are also traded in dollars. So a drought in America or a war in Ukraine can change the price of your dinner in the Philippines or Morocco. We are all connected through this invisible web of money. And that's where our story for today concludes. What a journey we have been on, from the simple exchange of goods in ancient villages to the complex digital and interconnected financial world we live in today. This one was a real exploration. I am so curious to hear your take on it all. What were your final thoughts? Do you have any lingering questions about why a country did what it did, or what you think might happen next? Please leave all your opinions, theories, and questions below. I truly love reading every comment and building this conversation with all of you. Thank you for spending your time with me today.